So I started doing some research, and I guess that since then there have been at least 60 other high-profile derailments.
60?
Multiple 60, 60, yes. And there
God.
were multiple derailments in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Montana.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
All right, Tara. So Monday we talked about the Maui quote unquote wildfires. There's still a lot of questions that I have about that. I totally missed something else that happened on it looks like July 15th. So ABC News reported that fire causes explosions at a Louisiana chemical plant, and residents were warned to stay indoors for hours. Did you hear about this?
No.
I hadn't either. But I guess it happened last month, and it was a chemical plant where it said that the explosions shook homes several miles away and sent all these flames and smoke into the air. So everyone was required to shelter indoors for several hours and turn off their air conditioners. And I guess the plant handles ethylene oxide, which is not only flammable, but it's a very toxic chemical. No one was injured, like they accounted for all the workers at the plant, but there's like 350 households within a half mile of this place that were there and told to stay indoors. And apparently they have environmental officials monitoring the air for like hazardous materials, but they haven't really said if there was any damage done in terms of like, is this going to be ongoing like East Palestine, where months afterward they're still finding traces of these toxic chemicals? It doesn't really say. And I just think it's crazy that something like this big, an explosion at a chemical plant that shakes homes, is not like, wasn't all over the place, wasn't heavily reported anywhere.
I feel like there's so much weird shit going on. Like, there were several recent train derailments again. And I don't know if you realize it's been 6 months since the East Palestine,
Wow.
Ohio train derailment. And honestly, it's hard to believe that was like in February because it seems like it was just a couple months ago. But so I started doing some research, and I guess that since then there have been at least 60 other high profile derailments.
60?
Multiple 60, 60, yes. And there
God.
were multiple derailments in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Montana. And I don't know if you remember this, but back in June, there was that train carrying hazmat that derailed in Montana when the bridge collapsed and 11 of the cars went plunging into the Yellowstone River. And like three of the cars were carrying over 250 tons of hot asphalt, and another four were carrying molten sulfur, and like all of it poured into the river. And then in mid-July, there was a 40 car freight train derailment of like, I think a dozen cars in White Marsh Township in Pennsylvania. And then a couple weeks ago in Havre, I don't know how to pronounce it, a city in Montana, where another 11 cars derailed, and one of them was carrying paint thinner, although supposedly it didn't spill. And then in the past couple weeks, like I mentioned, there have been several train derailments. There were two back-to-back derailments in New York, and one involved like 8 cars on a commuter train that derailed in New York City on the Long Island Railroad. And there were, I guess, like 100 riders on it, and 13 people were injured, and two of them were seriously injured. And then the very next day, 17 cars on a freight train derailed in upstate New York. And most of those were apparently empty oil tankers and reportedly no hazmat leaks. But Amtrak service and the State Route 5 were shut down for quite a while. And then that same day, there was another train derailment in Northwest Minnesota. And the day after that, a train derailment in Eastland, Texas, where I think 8 to 10 cars derailed and started multiple fires due to the dry grasslands because it's hot as fuck here in Texas. And one of the containers was for carrying hydrochloric acid. And fortunately, it was empty at the time of the derailment. But if it hadn't been, that would have been a huge fucking problem.
This
And
makes me
so,
never want to ride a train, like
well,
ever.
I know, and that's what's scary. Like, I love trains. Like, I absolutely love trains. And according to the US Bureau of Transportation Statistics, which I guess they've been like tracking, compiling, and analyzing information about transportation systems in the US since 1975. And they say there's an average of almost 1,700 train derailments every year. But if that's the case, why haven't we been hearing much about them until this past year, right?
Why is like all of them, chemicals that are toxic?
Right, exactly. And after the East Palestine train derailment got so much attention because it was really fucking handled inappropriately. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was a bipartisan Railway Safety Act that was introduced by Ohio lawmakers, and they wanted to improve rail safety and prevent another East Palestine incident. And the bill was approved by the Senate committee on May 10th, and it was supported by the National League of Cities and the NLC, and they estimate that an average of 3 trains derail per day, and that as many as half of those trains are carrying hazardous substances. And if you go to their website, nlc.org, they have this really cool interactive map that shows all the train derailments in the United States between 2012 and 2023. And it's all based on reporting by the Department of Transportation's Federal Rail Administration. And the map accounts for all the railway networks in the US. And it also shows all the congressional districts where the derailments occur. And so, according to the NLC, the top 5 states with train derailments over the past decade are number one, Texas, Illinois, California, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. So it's very comforting to me to know that Texas is in the top 5 and that I literally live less than 1 mile away from several intersecting rail lines. It's like I'm in the middle of all these intersecting rail lines. And so that's fun.
You
But
better sell
even
your
though
house before there's another hazardous spill.
I know, what's crazy? There was an accident and it wasn't like a derailment. Well, I guess it was, but it was because there was a car that was stalled on the tracks. And it's like the main street that goes to my house. That thing has been shut down for over a year. Like you cannot just cross the tracks to go to the highway anymore. You have to go through town and over and around and pick another street. For a fucking year, that thing has been closed.
That's
But
insane.
I know it's crazy. And so this committee passed this bill, but then it stalled, right? So I read this article that came out in the CBS Pittsburgh News on August 3rd, and it was talking about how Congress is deadlocked about what to do about this bill until the National Transportation Safety Board finishes their investigation of the East Palestine train derailment, which I guess could take up to a year. And then meanwhile, like you don't see much on it in the news anymore, but there's still continuing cleanup. And the railroad that's responsible, Norfolk Southern, they estimate that it's going to cost at least $803 million to remove all the hazardous chemicals, which frankly, how can they remove them? They got in the fucking water, right? How are you going to remove those? And then I guess they're accounting for lawsuits and penalties and stuff related to this derailment. But it brings up the question, like, why are there so many train derailments, right? And that same article that I referenced from August 3rd, the rail labor groups are saying a lot of it has to do with widespread cuts that the industry's made to be more efficient and that it's made things riskier. And then there was an article back in May on CNBC.com, and there was a former locomotive engineer named Mark Burrows, and he said accidents and derailments had become more difficult to avoid because all these railroad companies continue to pursue more demanding business plans and they keep making trains heavier and longer. And then the director of infrastructure policy at the U.S. Accountability Office, Elizabeth Repko, she believes that railroads are compensating for things like reduction in their mechanical staff. And so they're having other types of staff, like train conductors, do these pre-departure checks, and that they're possibly missing like critical safety concerns. And then even the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Jennifer Homendy, back in February when they did that press conference about East Palestine, she said that it was a 100% preventable disaster.
That's
Like that's
insane.
crazy. Yeah.
It is. And again, it's like, why aren't more people talking about this and questioning this? It's like when East Palestine happened, everyone was all about it and it got so much attention. But there's been like hundreds of things that have happened just this year alone. I mean, you said you named a bunch already, but not even just train derailments, like chemical spills and everything else. And it's like we're almost immune to it now. You know, we heard about East Palestine, we were like, oh my God. And then it's like, oh, another train derailment, another train derailment. And eventually you just become so used to it. And I feel like people have just kind of like forgotten this is serious. So we need to be questioning what the hell's going on here. I actually came across a TikTok account called Freedom Data, and they compiled all of the disasters in the US since the beginning of this year. And they provided screenshots of news articles. And I was going to list them all, but like there's so many. Like just through February, there are dozens. Things like the train derailing in Detroit, a chemical spill in Irvine that prompts a hazardous materials investigation, a factory just completely destroyed when there was a massive fire in Chicago Heights, a gas pipeline leak in Clark County, fuel spilling into the Yakima River in Oregon, investigation underway after another train derailment in Emery, a truck with hazardous chemical crashes in Tucson, and it goes on and on and on all over the country. Lots of derailments and lots of chemical fires and explosions at factories. So I just think that it's completely suspect. Like, I never in my entire life remember hearing about this many things happening in my entire life, let alone in the first couple months of the year. Like,
Right.
this was just through February. And the common theme with all of these is that it does damage to the air quality, the water, and the ground. So, once again, like, where are all the climate change people?
They're busy gluing their hands to airport runways and throwing paint on shit.
I wonder if I never did follow up with that to see if they actually had to amputate their hands, but I remember like that was a possibility.
Yeah, because
Yes.
remember seeing pictures of like there's just their hand in this huge chunk of asphalt that they had to
Yeah.
cut out of the ground.
I
Look,
mean, they could have been run over by a plane, first of all, like idiots, just complete idiots. Like that's what they're busy doing when there's all of these other things going on and they have no questions about that.
right.
Crazy. But like all of the funds and the resources that have come through, like what about the oh, what did they call it? The infrastructure package that
Right.
Biden kept talking about and saying how it was so great. Like, why hasn't and has any of it gone to the railroads? Because I feel like most of it had nothing to do with infrastructure and
Mhm.
was more like lining the pockets of, Democrats and whatever little projects and things that they were doing.
Yeah, they just
And
make it sound good by calling it the infrastructure
yeah,
bill.
exactly. And remember, like about a week ago when we did that episode on forever chemicals, and most of the train derailments and the chemical spills involve forever chemicals. So they're seeping into the ground, which then gets into the water supply. And they're called forever chemicals because they don't break down. So it's just like, I feel like we can't trust our water now. Like, how do we know how far that's gone? I mean, they were saying like the Ohio River, which goes everywhere. It's highly concerning. And what's even more concerning is the fact that like no one's really talking about it anymore. They've like long forgotten about East Palestine. Um, in Cleveland, the Case Western Reserve University has researchers that are still looking into the whole thing that happened in East Palestine. And I guess that they got residents to take part in a study to measure the long term health impacts as well as the cancer risk from the derailment. And Tara,
This
it
is going to take
saddens me.
years. That's going to take years.
Exactly. And like why isn't the government or like the EPA doing this? No, like it takes a university to like take this upon themselves rather than the people that should be looking into this. And instead, the Biden administration wants to send our tax dollars to illegal immigrants, putting them up in hotels. Or how about $130 billion to pay for Ukrainian pensions? Meanwhile, we have American citizens who could have cancer as a result of the derailment. And what did they get? Like $1,000 or something, which probably didn't even cover their hotel costs.
And some
Um,
bottles of water.
right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they wouldn't have even done that if there wasn't so much media attention. You
Right.
know, it's crazy. And since the derailment, crews estimate, I think you said this, around 89,000 tons of toxic waste have been removed and 28 million gallons of water, according to the state of Ohio. And again, like these are highly toxic forever chemicals. They have to go somewhere. They don't break down. So, like, where are they going? So, we might think, well, I'm safe. I'm here in Florida, but am I? Like, did they bring some of the chemicals here? Did they dump them in the ocean? Like, who knows? The article doesn't say. No one has said. And, it's like if you think that it doesn't affect you, it could. I think a while back we had read an article that said some of it was being buried in the ground in Texas. So it's like, who knows where all this has gone? Um, but again, like with Norfolk Southern saying it's going to cost $800 million to completely remove the hazardous chemicals and help the community and like deal with the lawsuits. Why is that an issue? If it's not an issue to send $120 billion to Ukraine, it should not be an issue to spend $800 million cleaning up toxic chemicals here in the United States. Like I'm so livid over this.
Well, that's the priority of the Biden administration, is to cover their corruption tracks.
Right, exactly. And all the people that say that they're so for like, helping the environment and this, that, and the other, they're nowhere to be seen. They're not covering this. They're not staying on top of this stuff. They don't care. So it's really frustrating, but I want to keep this front and center for everybody because it is a big problem. And if it truly is like train derailment accidents, then use some of that infrastructure money and fix it.
Or get this bill passed. Get this bill passed that's in Congress. It's just sitting there because they're waiting for an investigation to be over.
Right. And I'm kind of wondering, like, are these terrorist attacks and they're just not saying? Because think about all the damage you could do without ever like going to war or firing a gun. Like the whole thing seems very suspect. So anyhow, we'll stay on top of it. At least we'll keep talking about it and keep everyone informed. So all right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here for the next episode in a few days. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.